This is the introduction to the audio version of the Drawing Machines and Notes from Art Studio Robots newsletter number 38. And this is my first time doing this, so we'll see how it goes. Also, heads up, when I'm writing scripts for my YouTube videos, I write them kind of how I talk, but when I write my newsletter, I write them how I write, not how I talk. So this is going to be more like a director's commentary, where I'm not going to directly read it, I'm going to talk about it instead. And where there's visuals, I'll do my best to describe them. And one last thing before we get on, I'm also recording this as a video for YouTube, because, you know, why not? So, okay, we're out of the way, let's get started. Number 38, cold or wet, curse the ego, and ink, on where ideas come from. Again, being an arch nemesis, which is less glamorous than you'd hope, and a little bit about fountain pen ink, ditching social media, and then shutting/opening the shop. And I start the newsletter right at the top with a link to a place called anothergraphic.org, which is a really nice repository of graphic design where you can kind of sort it a little bit. I found it the other day. I thought I'd share it. And remember, steal, don't copy, and then also credit, transform, and remix, which obviously comes from the Still Like an Artist book, which you should have. Things fall apart. At home, in winter months, we play a game called Cold or Wet, while we're moving things from the tumble dryer to determine whether the clothes are actually still wet or just cold. And I think there's science behind this phenomenon, and there's a similar one I'm playing at the moment called Shit or Old. When I was young, sort of in my 20s, I was absolutely all over the latest tech that was very rudimentary at the time. I was hungry for the 90s internet, and I could not understand why some old people were reluctant to learn all this new stuff. And I was like, I'm never going to be like them. I'll always be deeply involved in new tech on the cutting edge. And now that I'm in my 50s, I'm thinking that I want to ditch social media, and that so much technology nowadays is just a horror show. And meanwhile, the algorithm is oh so busy showing me peaceful tech and calm social media growth content from influencers pushing their slow videos to me weekly. I mean, they totally have me pegged. And it's true, on YouTube, it's all how to be a creator without social media. And on Substack, it's let's do this nice and calmly. And I don't know whether they're aiming that to me, thanks algorithm, or whether it's just a thing or it has been. And I'm left wondering if those old 50-year-old people that I scorned when I was in my 20s were just like noping out of all that in the same way that I feel like doing now. They're like, yep, no, I'm not going to bother with any of that stuff. Or are those things actually worth rejecting? Are they now bullshit, or have I just gotten old? Shit or old? I suspect it's the former, because I'm still absolutely fascinated and dive into new technology all the time. But it's definitely become a self-awareness check when I feel like rejecting something. I'm like, am I rejecting it because it's actually bad, or am I rejecting it because I'm old and I just can't be bothered? At this point in the newsletter, there is a picture of an inkwell with a pen in it. It's one of these TWSBI inkwells, which I'll try to describe. It's an inkwell, but then it's got a cone, like an ice cream cone in it. And the idea is that you turn the whole inkwell over, and then when you flip it back, that cone fills with ink, and then you dip your fountain pen into it to slurp up all the ink. These are TWSBI Eco pens, and it really helps get the last of ink out of ink bottles using that. So it's a photo there because the next section is fountain pen ink. And there's a lovely post from James about why he uses fountain pen inks with pen plotters, and I'll try to show it up on the YouTube videos. On the audio, you'll just have to follow the link, which will hopefully be in the newsletter down below. He's got this amazing design. If you ever played with those mats when you were a kid that kind of had roads on them and then houses and you drove cars around, it's like a really huge generative pen plot that's a bit like that, but then it also mixes in like hidden object puzzles and then circuit boards as well. It's just amazing if you get a chance to see it. I haven't seen anything quite like it. And what's really epic about it is if you actually bought one, I'm not sure if James is selling them yet or how he's selling them, you would be the only one with that design. And I know that's generative art, but his stuff is just amazing. Anyway, he has a post all about fountain pens and fountain pen ink. You should definitely read the whole thing. The link is below, but I'm going to second the Dementris document ink recommendations. It's really good ink. You should totally use it. The ENSIMPLIFICATION. The pings and notifications fall like heavy rain on the tin roof, and I'm enjoying them in a zen-like fashion. "We could not charge your debit card. Please update your billing," reads the email. Two things have happened here. The first is that my old cards have just expired and they sent me new shiny ones. So now I have to update one password with all the numbers and then fix the payment information on the various services I use. The second is there's not always money in there, as I carefully move the ever-decreasing funds around 3 accounts, making sure the right amount is in the right place at the right time, and definitely not at the wrong time. SoundCloud helpfully sent me a "We'll take your yearly payment in 2 weeks" email, so I cancelled that. The browser testing suite in the cloud that I used to make sure my project last year worked on some wretched old version of a Google Pixel phone, meanwhile yanked $120 for their annual subscription straight out of the account, and then let me know after thank you for your payment. And that money was sitting there for something else. There are some services where I can't even work out how to cancel or change the billing information, or in some cases even log in, so fuck them. They can keep the old credit cards. The last time this happened, all the cards expiring, it was the only way to unearth some old services. An email arriving saying, "Oh, we couldn't charge you," is how I discovered that Heroku was still taking $10 a month. And I swore blind at that time that next time I'd log and track everything. That didn't happen. The culling of services probably should have happened quite a long time ago. I think I've got about 5 different ways of talking to ChatGPT via services that have wrapped their own skin around the API to have their own take on it. And the one that I'm keeping is Cursor, which is the AI code editor, where I can ask it to fix my code, which is great, but also I can pop a window open and go, "Can you write this stupid cat poem?" and all the normal GPT stuff. A sensible person in this situation, a better planned person, would have probably put a bunch of his pen plots up into the shop and then heavily promoted them on social media. Meanwhile, this person has decided to take a digital sabbatical from social media, and I've all but abandoned Twitter and Instagram and Threads and so on and so forth, which isn't actually true since I made the decision to not post to them. I think I posted to them more because I kind of feel more relaxed about it, as now I didn't have a plan to stick to. I didn't have a way of doing it properly. I just came a lot more chilled. Instead, I'm focusing just on Substack, and I think more on that in the future. I'll talk about that. And then on YouTube, I've also turned my shop off, so there's that as well, so I can't do that. So a little shop update. I've turned the shop off, not because I'm a total idiot. Well, I mean, that is true because I ought to be selling stuff right now, but because as much as I like using Shopify, it doesn't really do what I want to do. I want a place where I can put front-end code on my website so people can generate designs and pen plots and remix zines and generative prints, and then place an order with that design, along with other algorithmic generative kitty AI-powered and random print experiments. And I can't do any of that with Shopify. I want to more tightly integrate in my shop front end with the back end that I have running and the studio management stuff. But I can do some of that with Stripe, which is a card payment service. This might be a bad idea, having read about it, but I'm giving it a go anyway. The last time I used Stripe was over 10 years ago, and to be honest, back then it was a bit of a pain. However, recently having to deal with all the quickly evolving, shifting Web3 stuff, it was an utter delight to go back to the Stripe documentation and see just how much they've done to turn it into a wonderfully usable product, and secondly, just how great it is to use a well-developed, mature Web 2.0 process. I mean, it's really good. I nearly cried when I read the documentation. I went, holy crap, this is so straightforward to use. It was really good. Anyway, I'll get something very, very basic set up fairly soon, and at which point I'll have a couple of test plots and prints up there. It won't be anything sophisticated, no basket. You can add lots of things to it. So you buy this thing, you click the button, I ship it to you. And then the plan is to iterate over that model until we get somewhere a bit better. And then I'll tell everyone on social media that I'm not using. 28 days later, here in the newsletter, there is an image that has an emoji for each of the last 28 days. In the video, I'll put it here. I'm not going to describe it as audio. They're emojis, you know what they are. But this is what's happening here. Because I let Kitty, who is my AIPA, run the studio, and you can get more of an idea what Kitty's doing by checking out revdancat.com/Kitty, where I've put a bunch of things about Kitty and the sort of output that Kitty generates. So here's a page that shows you the morning questions that Kitty asks me each day. And then once Kitty has asked me those questions and I type in the answers, She then creates a to-do list for me to do that gets drawn out on the pen plotter, and then a whole bunch of suggestions. At the end of the day, I get asked more questions about how my day went, and then Kitty generates a journal for me that then also gets written out on the pen plotter and gets stuck into my physical journal. But everything on the revdancat.com/kitty is generated by AI. I am part of the dead internet problem. Anyway, because Kitty knows all about what I'm doing in the studio, I asked her to recap the last 28 days for me in the form of emojis, one per day, and that's what the image is. It's kind of fun. I would like to put that on a calendar view so I can see that the time in there I had to drive to Coventry, or there was an issue with the car and I had to do the MOT, so they kind of mean things to me, but I just want to see if I could do it. I still think my favourite thing is the end of each week, Kitty then generates some ideas for me based on everything I've entered for the week, and most of them are terrible, but there is some kind of fun stuff in there. And I put all that stuff online because I've been having quite a few talks about working with AI and working with AI as an artist or in the art studio on Zoom calls recently, and it's much easier to explain what I'm doing when I can actually point to things and sort of walk through them, which is why they're there. Plus, it's also become part of the documentation for the art-based research that I'm doing. It's at this point in the newsletter that Substack has put a button in that either says subscribe or thank you for subscribing to the newsletter. So audio listeners, please imagine a big orange button that says subscribe. Nemesis, and this should be quite a good one. There's a photo here of some prints that I have up on the iron girders, beams that I have in the art studio, and the one that's mainly featured is an artwork done by Amy Goodchild of the letter S repeated over and over again in watercolour. Now, Amy Goodchild, who, if you watch these videos, you probably already know, described me as her arch nemesis the other week. And this clearly means that I need to get a t-shirt printed, but at the same time, I totally get it. Now, I've given talks and guest lectures about being an artist, and the last one I gave, called How to Be an Awesome Artist, appears to have disappeared off YouTube, which I guess means I have to make a new version and put it on my own channel. I guess if you want to keep things, then you need to have more control over your own content, otherwise it can just disappear. Anyway, in that video I talked about where ideas come from, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. And at the end of it I was asked the question, what do you do when you work on something and then you see somebody else do something very similar? And the correct answer is, you just carry on. And I gave that answer with great confidence and authority because, you know, I am old and wise and it's easy to give that advice. But then I also advised not to listen to advice from people who are older than you, which kind of cancels out, I think. And I've also worked really hard to not draw validation or feelings of self-worth from social media, from likes, hearts, numbers. I just ignore numbers on YouTube and subscriber numbers and all of that type of stuff. I'm really good at ignoring that, or at least I thought I was. So when Amy published her excellent post on generative handwriting, I felt a little bit of something. There was a feeling going on, and I think it was jealousy, I'm not quite sure, with a small j, which was certainly a surprise, and I had to stop and work out what was going on, why I was feeling how I was feeling. And I think it was my ego having a little rant about made up future events that hadn't even happened yet. It was going off with, but Daniel, you've worked on generative handwriting, and we were going to write about the whole process, and Amy's done it, and she's got loads of likes and validation from Hacker News and things like that. Where's our likes? Where's our validation? Oh, where's my dopamine hits? And the ego kicks in to protect us, and it has a good reason to do that type of stuff, but it's often nowadays in ways that we don't need to be protected and can be quite unhealthy. And I think what's going on here is because I'm doing generative handwriting and AI and robots and drawing machines as part of my research, which is cool and different. But still at the same time, I was also, oh, and because this is a super niche thing, I mean, who else is doing generative handwriting on a drawing machine? I can probably sell some art and then have a little small exhibition about it. And my ego, with a small e, suddenly felt threatened that all of that could suddenly vanish because somebody else is doing it, especially because of the studio sale and financial things, me going, oh, I really need to sell some stuff, seeing somebody else selling some stuff makes you suddenly go, but what happens if somebody buys that and not my thing? Which, again, is all wrong, it's all nonsense. I mean, of course. The point is, of all of this, that even now, at over 50, after confidently telling people on how to deal with it, oh, you just carry on, after telling myself I didn't need validation, or worse, some made-up potential future validation for social media, it can still very unexpectedly, sink its claws into you. And while we have our rational brain telling us, no, it's all okay, I was certainly very surprised when I had that sudden small hit that I haven't felt for such a long time, I spent so long trying to deal with. So perhaps I was the arch nemesis, but only for a small moment before I got that ego, with a small e, back in check. Which brings us on to ideas, and I wrote about ideas back in newsletter number 1. Most people haven't read it, and it's about where ideas come from, and the writing of that newsletter is a lot better, but the short is that ideas roam in this sort of place called idea space. This is just a concept, a metaphor. And they're in that idea space trying to find a way through from that realm into our actual physical realm. And they do that where the walls get thin and the two realms start touching and the ideas can cross over. So you'll often see the idea popping up in several places simultaneously. The idea realm focuses on the strength of ideas. So it's different to the geographical realm. Say you have a very creative hub in London and then you have another very creative hub in Tokyo. Geographically, they're a long way apart, but twisted into idea realm, they're very close together because they're very strong creative hubs. So an idea can pass over into those two places, which is why you often see the same idea popping up simultaneously across the world. So in the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, she writes, ideas are driven by a single impulse to be made manifest. And then the ceremonial magician Alan Moore has talked about ways in which artists perform rituals to either summon ideas, some idea space, or make those walls thin so the idea can cross over and make themselves receptive to that idea, to be a vessel for it, in a philosophical and metaphorical way, of course. So I was delighted to come across this new quote, which is actually old, that I can use from Nick Cave's Red Hands files. He's talking about songwriting. The songs will come to you when you have adequately prepared yourself to receive them. They're not inside you, unable to get out. Rather, they are outside of you, unable to get in. Songs, in my experience, are attracted to an open, playful, and motivated mind. So again, this is us having to make ourselves receptive to receiving these ideas and making ourselves a good vessel for it. So this is why I'm using Kitty. One of the reasons why I'm using Kitty, my AIPA, wired up to a pen plotter, is to deconstruct myself, take myself out a part of the equation, and then allowing that to reconstruct ideas again. And all of what we've just said explains to a degree while this recent modern generative handwriting has suddenly popped up in a few different places. Again, from that lecture, there was talk about, well, what happens if you write an idea down in your book of ideas, but you never quite get round to it? You go, oh, here, I've got a brilliant idea, but I'm busy doing this, I'm busy doing this, I'm busy doing this. And then suddenly you see somebody else do that idea, and you're like, but that was my idea. They've stolen my idea. That I was going to do that. But the thing is, you didn't, and you haven't, because you were busy doing something else. So that idea sort of got tired of waiting for you, and then it went and found a different vessel that it could occupy. And you have to be pleased that that idea has somehow come into existence. You can't keep it trapped in your to-do list, in your sketchbook. We owe it to ideas to help them the best they can to get manifested. Which brings us neatly to the end. Substack tells me when I've reached a point of the newsletter when writing it that email clients will truncate it if I write any more, so I'll wrap this up pretty quickly now because I've reached that point. The next issue should be with you around the 11th of July. If the whole old studio selling hasn't happened by then, I will probably start to cry, so wish me luck on that one. Update for the video watchers on the audio. I wrote this newsletter last week to give myself time to record and edit this, and I've seen the estate agent since then, and selling the studio is still another 4 or 5 weeks away, which takes us into the start of August, and that's a whole month of a payment thing, so I'm fucked. Also, for legal, apparently, reasons, I have to stick a postal address in the footer of each newsletter along with an unsubscribe link. So if you do need to get hold of me and I'm not responding or using social media, there is a 97% chance, according to Royal Mail, that anything posted there will actually get to me. But remember, from 10 bullets, number 6, sent, does not mean received. And I will include a link to the video from 10 bullets about that down below. Anyway, I love you all. I will see you next time.